was just so happy the entire book because of it. I love them so much. They are one of my favorite fictional couples. Hello, I am Jessie the Sleepy Koala and welcome. Today I am here to give you a review of The Storm of Echoes by Christelle Damos. The Storm of Echoes is the fourth book in the Mirrorvisitor quartet and follows on from where we left off in the third book, where Ophelia has made it to Babel and has found Thorn and now has to try and defeat God. This book is everything that I wanted from book 3. It has the really interesting plot to do with the overall big bad. It has a fast-paced plot. The character work is really well done, as Damos always seems to achieve. And I found myself just glued to the page while reading through this book. It was just really, really good. As it is the last book in the quartet, it does obviously deal with the big bad finally, which is what I've been waiting for since book 2. So I was incredibly pleased that we finally got to that. And I was also very pleased with the outcome in the end and the resolution to what happened. I will go into spoilers, but I figured for the start of this I would just give my general impressions just in case anyone is watching and wants something non-spoilery before I get into the actual spoilers of the plot and the characters. As much as I liked the plot of this, it was very confusing, like very, very, very confusing. And once you get to the end and you have the bigger picture, it makes sense, but the clues you get along the way are the most confusing things that you probably could get all at once. And they really don't make that much sense. And this book does the thing where Ophelia comes to conclusions or she realizes something, but it's not clear to the reader. So we then have to wait for her to explain that to someone else in the book. I personally actually really liked that this happened because it made me feel like I wasn't missing something, because there would be this explanation of what's going on with all of the confusing things. But I know that that is something that would annoy other readers, so that might be a turnoff for some people in this book, though personally it wasn't for me. Something that this book also had quite a lot of is villains. There were quite a few antagonists in this book, which was a little bit surprising, and it didn't quite click for me until we were kind of dealing with them as well, that I realized just how many antagonists have been put in this book, because we had to wrap up with so many different people. I was fine with the wrap-ups. I had no problems with them whatsoever, but I just hadn't realized how many villains there were that we had encountered along the way, that it just kind of started piling up by this point, so that we had to figure out what to do with them before we could get to the big bad that was God. One thing I like about just the makeup of this book, not the story, is in the very start of it we have an overview of all of the different characters as well as the synopsis of what happened in the last book, which was just really nice. And I can imagine if you've been waiting for whoever knows how long for this to be translated into your language, to then have something at the front that gives you a reminder of who the key players are and what their deal is and where we're up to. That's really helpful. Like, I read them straight through, so it was nice for me because I could experience these character descriptions as they were, but they weren't necessary for me. But I just wish more books would do this. I wish more books would put in synopses of previous books in the start of it, just so you had a quick refresher before you went into the book. And if you're reading them straight through, you can just skip them. You don't have to read them. But when you haven't read something for so long, the details fade. And I know because there was a gap between me reading the first book, A Winter's Promise, and the second book, Missing of Clair de Lune, and the fact that there was that overview at the start of Missing of Clair de Lune about what happens in A Winter's Promise was super helpful for me. So I really wish more books did that, and it was nice that this book also had the character lists as well, because we are getting a bigger cast of characters, even though a lot of them aren't as relevant in this as they were in previous books. There is this side plot going on with looking for Landmark, and honestly I find it a bit of a strange side plot, but it is what it is. We do lose some of the more core characters from the first couple of books to this side plot because they have to be kept busy while Ophelia is also doing what she's doing in Babel. But to get into the book and to get into the spoilers of the book, and we're going to be starting with a big one, so if you don't want to know spoilers, this is the time to stop. But if you are sticking around, the first thing I really want to talk about is the ending, specifically the fact that Thorn falls into the cage and goes into the inverted land and then never comes back. And the end of the book is Ophelia going to look for him. I don't like open endings and I don't like fake out deaths. And I feel like both of these tropes have been used here because of the way that Thorn falling into the cage was framed. It came across like, oh no, has he died? I got such a Sirius Black in Harry Potter moment when I read that. I was like, oh no, he's dead. He's going to die. Because of course we don't know what's going to happen yet. But all we know is that the genealogist just disintegrated and now Thorn is going to disintegrate. So that came across like a fake out death to me. And then the open ending of he hasn't been saved, he's still there, she has to go after him, and that's her going off on her next adventure. And it felt unfinished because he hadn't been saved, he was still there. This felt like an open plot thread that just was kind of left to dangle, and it's left to dangle in a way that seems like sequel bait material. But as far as I'm aware, these books are done. There isn't going to be another one that follows on with Ophelia looking for Thorn, as much as I would like to have that. So I just don't quite know where I sit with all of this, because on one hand, I don't want Thorn to die. I want Thorn and Ophelia to be reunited. I want her to find him, and I want them to have a happily ever after, because they just deserve some happiness after all the bullshit they went through. But at the same time, the use of the tropes that I don't like is still there and weighs on the back of my mind and makes me not like the ending, even though I kind of don't, like, I don't want Thorn to be dead, but I also don't like the way that it was presented, where it almost seemed like he died, but then he didn't, but then nothing happens, he doesn't get saved, and that's just left open. So I really don't know what I think of the ending. What do you think of the ending? Let me know in the comments. Did you like what happened? Were you on the fence about it like I am? Just how did you feel about the fact that Thorn wasn't rescued, that Thorn was still stuck there, and that there was kind of this open ending to the book of what happened next? Let me know in the comments, because I'm very interested to see if people agree with me, if people disagree, and what other thoughts are. Moving on from that, let's talk about Thorn and Ophelia, because we always have to talk about Thorn and Ophelia because they are just such a precious couple and I love them to pieces so much. And this book gave me everything that I'd wanted and everything that I needed, because they're finally happy together. They're finally in sync. They're working together. We've got the best payoff from all of the angst and all of the waiting that we've had for the last 3 books. It's finally paid off, and oh, it was so good. I've got goosebumps even thinking about it. They're finally trusting each other. They're finally working together instead of working against each other. It's so good. And there are just some amazing scenes in this book where Thorn and Ophelia really click as a couple and are helping each other and are trying so hard to work together. One of these scenes is when Ophelia first enters the observatory and she is slapped by one of the watchers, and Thor just stands up. He's just on his feet immediately because someone just slapped his wife in front of him, and he is not okay with that. And Ophelia picks up immediately that he's about to break the plan. He's about to reveal everything because he's so uncompromising that people should not be allowed to hurt his wife. That is not okay. So, I love that scene so much. It shows how much he cares and just how much he's willing to give away to see that Ophelia is safe. We also get like opening up and talking to each other. In this book, we get the scene where, and it's so tragic, where Thorn breaks down after hurting second, and Ophelia's there to comfort him and helps him out. But later, they have the best conversation that shows how much better their communication is, because they're talking about what happened, and they have this exchange. Earlier on, in the antechamber, you used your claws on mine. I would rather you didn't do that again. Did I hurt you? No. Thorn's tone had become harsh, somewhat embarrassed too. No, he repeated less harshly. In fact, I didn't know that dragon's claws could be used for anything but wounding. But you won't always be at my side to regulate my power. It's for me to regain control of it. There are some problems we can only solve alone. And I love the acknowledgement that they can't solve all of each other's problems. They do have to still work on their own problems by themselves. And also the fact that Thorn just expresses that he doesn't want Ophelia to do something. He wasn't okay with that. And they have just such a civil conversation about it, and such a good communication of just, hey, can you not do this again, please? Okay. And it was just so good. It was such a good little piece of dialogue, a little conversation they had that showed how much better they're communicating. For instead of Thorn forcing his will and forcing his thoughts and getting angry at Ophelia, he is calm and he asks her politely to not do something, which is such a good way to communicate with your partner. If your partner's doing something that you don't like, then definitely tell them, but there's ways to do it that don't involve yelling at someone or people getting defensive. You can just ask, hey, can you not do that because of this reason? Or just, can you not do that? And Thorn does that, and I loved it so much. And this is, of course, after they've just talked about how they love that they're not a conventional couple, and I thought that was so cute. And of course, just Ophelia being in the observatory, Thorn at one point says, like, if you need to leave, I will get you out of here right now. We will leave. We will go. And because he knows just how much danger she is putting herself in to do this, but he's also accepting that she's chosen to put herself in that danger. And he's not going to try and force her out of it or force her to do something. He's going to respect the choice that she made and respect the continued choices that she makes as she goes along, of whether she does want to pull out and drop the mission or whether they want to keep going. And of course, at the point when there is no way out, when Ophelia is being forced onto the airship and there's no way to get around the fact that she is getting on that ship whether she likes it or not, Thorn just gives up the ruse. He gives it up. He's like, no, I'm not letting you go alone. I will go with you. It's been a good run. Let's go. Let's give this up. I will run away with you on this sinking airship because I won't let you leave by yourself. And there's this continued theme throughout the book of them doing things together. And this is just another example where there is a situation where they could have gone apart, where Thorn could have stayed and continued the ruse while Ophelia was put on the ship. He didn't. He didn't want to leave her. He wanted to stay with her and be together. And while on the ship, Thorn gives over authority to Ophelia. She has a plan and he can see that, and he's not going to interrupt that plan because he doesn't have one. He doesn't know what to do, whereas she's got something she wants to try, and he completely has over control and the reins to Ophelia. And there's such a good little passage about this. Thorn was naturally authoritarian. It was always he who gave instructions. For him to await her orders with total confidence, what's more, made quite an impression on Ophelia. And then, of course, Ophelia does my favorite thing in the entire book and animates the ship, but let's talk about that in a little while when we talk about the plot. And then, of course, once they are on the new unfound landmass, they have what is such a sweet conversation where Ophelia finally reveals what's been eating away at her inside and leans on Thorn and uses him as her crutch because she needs someone and he is there and that's what he's there for. And there's so many little moments in this conversation that are just perfect and beautiful, like the time where they're bantering about getting married again and Ophelia being the one to ask and whether Thorn would actually say yes to her. and he's trying to cheer her up. He's trying to make her feel better. And it's just so sweet. It's such a sweet, sweet moment between them. And it just shows how close they've grown and how much better they are as being a couple than they were before. And there's this quote at the beginning of the book that I just love as a description of them being together. With her whole body, Ophelia sensed what he had become to her, what she had become to him, and nothing in the world seemed as solid. They work so good together, and they're finally together, and it's all working finally, and I was just so happy the entire book because of it. I just really had wanted this for so long, and we finally got such a good payoff for them. I love them so much. They are one of my favorite fictional couples, and I think this book did such an amazing job at rounding off their relationship and getting them to the place that we've been wanting them to be at for the entire series, and it did it wonderfully. Moving on, though, to talk about Ophelia herself, and what I'm really interested in talking about is her powers, or her loss of powers in this book. In this book, Ophelia has to undergo all of these tests, and it's changing her. It's pulling her shadow further away from her until she can crystallize one of her family powers into becoming its own echo. And the entire time I was reading, I just felt so disconcerted about it all, because it just felt like a family power is so personal to someone. It's part of who they are. And this process that she was going through, it was trying to take part of who she was away from her and cut it out. And that was such a disturbing thought to me. First, with losing her mirrorvisitor powers, I felt lost when she lost her powers, and it was just an awful, awful feeling, because it really felt like someone had taken part of her and stolen it away from her. And it wasn't theirs to steal. It wasn't someone's to take. You can't just take who someone is and take that away from them. But yet, that's what it felt like this book was doing. It still felt uncomfortable later on, where she switched out her mirrorvisitor powers for her reading powers. I felt such loss and grief when she came out of that mirror without fingers and is no longer able to read things, when that has been such a huge part of who she was. But at least that time, it was sort of more consensual for her choosing to take back the echo and take back that power and give up something so that she could come back to the real world. Whereas the crystallization was just awful. It's such a gruesome, awful process to take something away from someone like that. So I thought that that was really well done in getting that feeling of just everything not being right. Like, it was written in such a good way to get the feelings across that this is wrong, this is not good, this is bad. And I really liked the way it was written and done. There is even a bit of foreshadowing earlier in the book about Ophelia potentially losing her fingers. It's not directly saying, hey, you're gonna lose your fingers later in this book, but it just seemed too deliberately placed to not be a deliberate thing that had been put into the book. It's when she's talking to Helen at the arena. You should go beyond the cage. Turn back. Really turn back. There, and only there, you will understand. You may even be able to make yourself useful. You claim that I afford you my trust, to your hands and you, but when the time is over, will you have enough fingers? It's too deliberately phrased to not be foreshadowing for later. In terms of plot, there's a couple of small little things that I wanted to talk about. The first is one that didn't work for me at all. It's bringing back the knight and having the knight be involved in all of this. It felt so bizarre. Like, maybe it's because I didn't like the way that we dealt with him in the second book, but it just felt really weird to have him turn up and then later find out that he's gone into the inverted place, and that's it. That's the end of his story. He seemed like an antagonist that was kind of added because we needed someone and might as well bring back an old person, but it just seemed really out of place, and it didn't work for me whatsoever. Something that did work really well for me, though, was the reveal that the automatons are echoes, and I thought that was really well done, and it made Lazarus much scarier than he had seemed beforehand, because that is just so insidious and such, like, it feels so evil to be taking people, turning them into echoes, and then turning the echoes into the automatons. And I love that it's brought up in the book that the whole no servitude of man by man is just such a lie and such bullshit. And Lazarus isn't sorry at all. He just wants to do what he wants to do. He really has such little empathy for anything that's going on around him. So I found him to be quite a compelling villain in the end because of the automaton reveal. Another plotline that I don't know if I would say it didn't work, but it just felt a bit strange. The whole side plotline with finding Landmark just seemed to be there to keep characters busy more than anything, because we needed them out of the picture until we needed them in the picture. But part of the storyline of Landmark was everything with Victoria, and I really liked her in the third book. I thought that it was a really clever way to give us an insight into what was happening in the pole without having to do all that much there with the characters. But what was happening with her and like her soul being in the inverted realm and getting lost and then being found by Thorn, it didn't make much sense to me. I just didn't quite make much sense. It seemed like Davos was trying to do the same thing of giving us an insight into another storyline through Victoria, except I don't understand why she got stuck in the well. I don't really get why she was sinking at all throughout the entire thing and what was going on there. It wasn't really explained. But also, it's never explained why when she goes back to her body, she can suddenly talk and move around more than she could before, because she had already been in her body before. So I don't know why Thorn finding her in the well really fixed anything. And I do wish there had been a bit more explanation on that side of things of what the hell was going on. Something that I liked in this book that comes up with Thorn is his disability. He obviously has his leg brace because he shattered his leg back at the end of book 2. And we see time and time again that it causes him problems. It jams up all the time. He has to fix it. It breaks in book 3 and he has to fix the whole thing. And I just enjoyed the inclusion of someone with a disability having to deal with that disability. He's still able to get around, and Ophelia even remarks at one point that he moves really fast for someone who has a disability. But at the same time, I like that the book still shows that the contraption gets caught up, that like when it is broken, he is helpless to an extent, because that is what it would be like. I really enjoyed that as an inclusion of Thorn's character. The other part of inclusion that I liked in this book was Blaze and Professor Wolf. I thought that they were really sweet together. I liked that there was the grumpy sunshine trope going on. I thought that was really cute, and just like how different they were, but how interested they were in each other and how in love they were with each other. It's never said that they're in love, but I would like to believe that they were. The fact that Blaze and Professor Wolf were circling each other for 15 years really makes me think that there are some strong feelings there. And I am really glad that they seem to get together in the end and have a relationship. I would have actually liked to see a little bit more of their budding relationship, or of them getting together, instead of it just kind of happening really quickly and then they're together and that's it. It would have been nice to see a bit more of the progression there, but as it is, I did quite enjoy Professor Wolf and Blaze together. There was, I think, a plot thread that was kind of dropped though with Professor Wolf and Blaze, because Ophelia tells them on the unknown island that she has been lying to them. This is her name. She will come back and tell her story. And that's never followed through with. And it would have been nice to get some resolution in that vein. And it also, like, this also makes me feel like this is sequel bait to be set up to be in another book, but I don't think there's going to be any more books. So it's kind of hard to tell whether this was meant to be going anywhere or not. But I would have liked if there was a little bit more resolution to Ophelia revealing herself to Professor Wolf and Blaze. The last things I want to talk about are just some of my favorite moments in this book. There was some really cool things that came up and I love them so much. To start us off, I've got to talk about my favorite moment in this book, and it's Ophelia animating the airship. And I loved it so much. I love how it played into the fact that her shadow had reattached and she was no longer misaligned, and that was part of why she could do what she did. And the fact that her family had this history of being able to work with broken objects, it all just came together so well. And I was just imagining her there pretending to steer this ship, and it was so cute. I loved that moment so much. It was definitely the highlight of the book for me because that was such a cool moment. Another really cool moment that I really liked was a lot less dramatic than the airship, but it's when Ophelia first escapes her room at the Deviants Observatory and she has to go out this window onto the void and hope that the Transcendium is actually there. And it was just such a cool moment of world building where you've got this void that you don't want to fall into, but you have these inventions that have been put on the wall so that people don't accidentally fall out and die. And I just loved reading Ophelia's terror as she tried to get out that window and get onto the Transcendium and just really hoping that she wasn't going to fall into the void. It was great. And the last cool thing that was in this book was we got a description of what Ophelia would look like if she hadn't gone through the mirror and combined with Eulalia, and that is Elizabeth. According to this book, that is what Ophelia would have looked like if she had grown up normally, and it makes a lot of sense. That when Ophelia let Eulalia out of the mirror, it worked both ways. Ophelia grew to look like Eulalia, and Elizabeth, as Eulalia, grew to look like Ophelia, and I thought that was really cool. So that is everything that I wanted to talk about with this book. I hope you have enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts in the comments on this book. What did you enjoy? What didn't you enjoy? Really interested to know what people think of the ending. If you have made it this far through the video, leave a star emoji in the comments just so I know. I find these really fun, just particularly on long videos like this, because I know that people probably aren't going to watch them all the way through, but that's okay. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all next time. Bye!